stuck but still trying. Have you ever felt like you were living your life on pause? Not in a dramatic way. No tears every night. No big disaster. Just a quiet feeling that follows you around. You wake up. You go to work. You come home. You eat. You sleep. And then you do it all again. When I first started living and working in the United States, that feeling stayed with me every single day. It wasn't heavy enough to break me, but it was strong enough to make me ask, is this really my life? From the outside, everything in America looked fine. Clean streets, full grocery stores, a stable job with clear rules. But winter didn't care about appearances. The cold slipped through my jacket, through my gloves, and settled somewhere deep inside me. I remember driving to work on gray mornings when the sky looked like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. Fog or clouds. Radio on. English songs playing. I understood maybe 60%. Enough to follow along. Not enough to feel like I belonged. At work, I did my job well. I spoke to my coworkers using safe English. Good morning. How are you? I'm good, thanks. Those sentences were like loose change in my pocket. Always there. Always useful. But never enough to buy something that really mattered. You know that feeling, right? When your English is correct, but it doesn't feel like you. When you speak, but your real thoughts stay quiet. In the evenings, I went back to my small apartment. Yellow lights. Simple meals. Familiar smells from home that made me feel warm and lonely at the same time. I opened my English books and looked at perfect dialogues. People ordering coffee. People asking for directions. Everyone smiling at the right moment. But my life didn't feel like a textbook conversation. My life felt like audio with static. You could hear it, but it wasn't clear. Slowly, I entered a state that many immigrants know but rarely talk about. Not despair. Something more dangerous. Numbness. You don't expect much anymore, but you're also afraid to stop trying. You keep studying English, not because you love it, but because you're scared of what will happen if you quit. You tell yourself, just a little longer. But a little longer turns into months. Then years. Psychologists call this low-grade burnout. Your brain doesn't scream, stop. It quietly whispers, why bother? Motivation doesn't disappear. It slowly wears down, like soap that has been used too many times. And here's the strange part. The safer and more stable your life looks, the easier it is for your brain to accept routine. It says, this doesn't hurt. You can handle this. And so, you do. I used to think I just wasn't good at languages. Maybe English was only a survival tool for me. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. I studied because I had to. I listened because I was afraid of falling behind. I spoke because there was no other choice. And when you live like that, you don't believe something beautiful can grow from boredom. You don't believe love or change could be hiding inside an ordinary evening English class, where everyone sits one arm's length apart and avoids eye contact. But here is something strange and quietly hopeful. When you keep doing something, even without passion, your brain changes in small ways. Neural pathways don't need big motivation. They need consistency. Every time you listen to slow English, every time you read a sentence and understand a little more, every time you speak, even when your heart is racing, these small actions add up. Like loose change. Worthless day by day. But one day, You realize you have enough to buy something much bigger. At that time, I didn't know any of this. I only knew that, even though I was tired, I still signed up for an English class. Not a famous one. Not an expensive one. Just a very ordinary class. A room full of adults who came after work, holding coffee cups and carrying unfinished stories. I didn't expect anything. I honestly didn't. I just thought, at least I'm still trying. That sentence mattered more than I realized. Because trying, even without hope, keeps a door open. It doesn't promise miracles. It just refuses to lock everything shut. If you're listening to this now, maybe you recognize yourself. You're learning English, but the excitement is gone. You're living in the US. Or dreaming about it, and reality feels heavier than Instagram ever showed you. You wonder if these repetitive efforts are leading anywhere. I won't answer that yet. I only want you to remember one small thing. Many meaningful journeys don't start with passion. They start with quiet persistence. Back then, I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I wasn't stopping. And sometimes, that alone is the decision that changes your entire life. America isn't a movie. Before I moved to the United States, America lived in my imagination like a movie set. Bright lights, fast success, friendly smiles everywhere. People speaking confident English with perfect timing, like they had rehearsed their lives in advance. Even when I knew that was unrealistic, a part of me still expected something cinematic to happen the moment I landed. A clear sign. A turning point. A feeling that said, yes, this is where everything changes. What I got instead was weather. Not metaphorical weather. Real weather. The kind that doesn't care about your dreams or your backstory. My first year in the U.S. taught me that climate can shape your emotions more than motivation quotes ever will. Summer was loud and aggressive, air conditioners fighting the heat like exhausted boxers. Winter was quiet, sharp, and unforgiving. The cold didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative. Like paperwork. Like another thing you had to deal with. I remember my first truly cold morning. I stepped outside, took one breath, and felt my lungs protest. The sky was pale, almost white, and the sun looked weak, like it had called in sick. People moved quickly, heads down, hands buried in pockets. No one made eye contact. No one lingered. America, in that moment, didn't feel welcoming or hostile. It felt efficient. And efficiency, I learned, can feel very lonely. In movies, people fall in love in coffee shops during winter. Steam rises from cups. Snow falls gently. In real life, you rush from your car to the building because your face hurts from the cold. Romance is the last thing on your mind. Survival comes first. Staying warm. Getting through the day. Making sure your paycheck clears. Cultural differences started showing up in small, quiet ways. At work, people were polite but distant. Friendly but busy. Let's catch up sometime didn't mean what I thought it meant. It didn't mean soon. It didn't even mean at all. It was just a sentence people used to close conversations. At first, I took it personally. I wondered if my English wasn't good enough. If I had said something wrong. Over time, I realized it wasn't about me. It was about pace. America moves fast, and relationships often move slowly, if they move at all. Even food felt different. Portions were bigger. Flavors were louder. Everything came with options. Too many options. When you're already tired from translating your thoughts all day, choosing between 12 salad dressings feels like a personal attack. My brain wanted simplicity. My environment offered abundance. That contrast drained me more than I expected. And then there was the language layer on top of everything. English surrounded me constantly, but it rarely slowed down. Conversations at work moved fast. Jokes landed and disappeared before I could catch them. I understood the words, but not always the tone. Sarcasm slipped past me. Cultural references flew over my head. I laughed when others laughed, hoping it was the right moment. This is where many people lose confidence without realizing it. Not because they fail, but because they're constantly slightly behind. Half a second late. One meaning short. Always adjusting. Always catching up. That mental effort adds up. By the time you get home, you're not just tired, you're depleted. I started noticing how climate and culture worked together. Cold weather pushed people indoors. Busy schedules kept them there. Social life required planning weeks in advance. Spontaneity was rare. Back home, connection happened naturally. In America, it felt scheduled. Intentional. Sometimes transactional. You had to decide to connect. And when you're already exhausted, deciding feels heavy. There were moments when I questioned my choice. Not dramatically. Quietly. While washing dishes. While waiting at traffic lights. While watching other people seem so comfortable in a place where I still felt like a guest. I told myself I just needed more time. More English. More adjustment. More patience. What I didn't realize then was that discomfort wasn't a sign of failure. It was a sign of transition. Neuroscience tells us that unfamiliar environments keep the brain in a constant state of alert. Your nervous system works overtime, scanning for threats, decoding new rules. That's why everything feels harder at first, even simple things. It's not because you're weak. It's because you're adapting. Once I understood that, something softened inside me. I stopped judging myself so harshly for feeling tired. I stopped comparing my behind the scenes to other people's highlight reels. I accepted that America didn't need to feel like a movie to be meaningful. Real life rarely has background music. Slowly, I began to see routine differently. The drive to work. The same streets. The same grocery store. The same weather complaints exchanged with coworkers. These weren't signs that nothing was happening. They were signs that something was settling. Taking root. Routine, I learned, is not the enemy of growth. Sometimes it's the soil. If you're listening to this and feeling disappointed because life in the U.S. doesn't look the way you imagined, I want you to hear this clearly. You didn't get it wrong. You're just in the part they don't show in movies. The quiet middle. The adjustment phase. The chapter where nothing exciting happens on the surface, but everything important is being built underneath. Back then, I thought America had failed to impress me. What I didn't know was that it was preparing me. Teaching me patience. Teaching me endurance. Teaching me how to stay open even when things feel repetitive and cold. Because sometimes, the most important transformations don't arrive with fireworks. They arrive disguised as routine, wearing a winter coat, speaking fast English, and quietly asking you one question every morning. Can you stay a little longer? And without realizing it, I did. Why I joined that class. I didn't join the English class because I was inspired. I joined because I was tired of feeling invisible. There's a difference. Inspiration feels light and exciting. Tiredness feels heavy, practical, and urgent. At that point in my life in the United States, everything I did was driven by practicality. I didn't wake up thinking about dreams. I woke up thinking about schedules, bills, weather, and whether my English would be good enough for another full day. The idea of taking an English class had been sitting in the back of my mind for months. Not loudly. More like a browser tab I never closed. I kept telling myself I was too busy, too tired, too old to sit in a classroom again. My English wasn't terrible. I could work. I could survive. So why add one more thing to my already crowded life? But survival has a way of shrinking your world. Little by little, you stop doing things that don't feel immediately useful. You stop choosing discomfort. You stop choosing growth. And one evening, after a long day that wasn't particularly bad or good, just long, I realized something uncomfortable. My English was keeping me functional, but it was also keeping me distant. That realization didn't come during a deep conversation. It came in the most ordinary moment. I was at work, standing with a group of coworkers during a short break. They were talking about something small, weekend plans, a TV show, a joke that had nothing to do with work. I understood the words. I understood the meaning. But I didn't join in. Not because I wasn't allowed to. Because I didn't know how to step in naturally. By the time I formed a sentence in my head, the moment had passed. I smiled. I nodded. I stayed quiet. And that was when it hit me. My English wasn't failing me academically. It was failing me socially, emotionally. It was protecting me from making mistakes, but it was also protecting me from connection. That night, driving home, I didn't feel sad. I felt clear. And clarity can be more powerful than motivation. I searched for local English classes online. Nothing fancy. Community-based. Evening classes for adults. The descriptions were simple. Improve your communication. Build confidence. Practice real-life English. I almost closed the page. Confidence felt like a big promise. Real-life English felt intimidating. Real life was exactly where I struggled. Still, I registered. The class met twice a week in the evening. After work. After dinner. After energy was supposed to be gone. On the first day, I almost didn't go. My body argued with me. My couch looked comfortable. My brain listed reasons to stay home. You can learn online. You already know enough. It's going to be awkward. All reasonable arguments. All very convincing. But I went anyway. The classroom was nothing special. Fluorescent lights. A whiteboard with old marker stains. Chairs that weren't designed for comfort. The teacher smiled too much, the way people do when they're used to meeting tired adults. Around me were people like me, immigrants, international students, workers, parents. Different backgrounds. Same look in the eyes. A mix of hope and exhaustion. We introduced ourselves one by one. Name. Country. Reason for being there. When it was my turn, my voice sounded smaller than I expected. I said something simple. I want to improve my English for daily life. It wasn't poetic. It was honest. What surprised me wasn't the content of the class. It was the pace. The English was slow. Intentionally slow. The teacher repeated sentences. She waited. She let silence exist. For the first time in a long time, English wasn't chasing me. I wasn't rushing to keep up. I could breathe. We practiced everyday conversations, ordering food, making small talk, expressing opinions in simple words. Nothing advanced, nothing impressive. And yet, something shifted. Because when language slows down, you notice details. Tone, emotion, intention. English stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like a tool for being human. I realized something important that night. Confidence doesn't come from knowing big words. It comes from surviving small moments. Saying one sentence and not apologizing for your accent. Asking one question and not rushing to explain yourself. Letting your English be imperfect and staying in the conversation anyway. I went home feeling lighter. Not excited. Not transformed. Just lighter. Like I had stretched a muscle I'd been protecting for too long. I kept going back. Week after week. Not because every class was amazing. Some were boring. Some days I was too tired to care. But the routine mattered. Neuroscience shows that repetition in a safe environment lowers fear responses in the brain. Slowly, your nervous system learns that speaking up won't kill you. That mistakes aren't emergencies. That being seen is survivable. And then, without realizing it, the class became more than a class. It became a place where time slowed down. Where people listened. Where routine didn't feel like a trap, but like an anchor. I didn't join that English class to change my life. I joined it to make my days a little easier. I joined because I was practical, tired, and quietly brave. I joined because something in me refused to disappear into routine completely. What I couldn't see yet was that this very ordinary decision, made without passion, without vision, without drama, was already setting everything else in motion. Because sometimes, the moment that changes your life doesn't feel important at all. It just feels reasonable. The man beside me. I didn't notice him at first. And that's important. Because if this were a movie, I would tell you I felt something immediately. A spark. A moment. A look that lasted half a second too long. But real life, especially real life in an evening English class in the United States, doesn't work like that. Real life is quieter. Less dramatic. Almost disappointing until you look back. He was already there when I walked into the classroom that day. Sitting in the second row, slightly to the side. Not in the center. Not hiding in the back either. Just there. He had a notebook, a pen, and a posture that suggested he was taking this seriously, but not emotionally. The kind of person who shows up on time, sits down and waits. No scrolling. No sighing. No obvious boredom. We sat next to each other because there were empty chairs and no reason not to. That was it. No destiny. No coincidence that felt meaningful in the moment. Just an available seat. The teacher started the lesson, speaking slowly, carefully. Simple English. Repeated sentences. The usual routine. I focused on the board, on my notes, on not falling behind. I was aware of him only in the most practical sense. He passed me a worksheet when I missed it. I nodded. He nodded back. That was our first interaction. No words. Just polite efficiency. If you asked me that night what I remembered about him, I probably would have said very little. Dark jacket. Calm energy. Quiet voice. Nothing that stood out. And that's the strange thing about important people. At the beginning, they often look ordinary. So ordinary that your brain doesn't bother to label them as special. Over the next few classes, I started noticing patterns. He always arrived early, always sat in the same seat, always wrote things down carefully, even when the exercise seemed too easy. When the teacher asked questions, he didn't rush to answer, but he answered when called on. His English wasn't perfect, but it was steady, thoughtful. Like he chose his words the way some people choose their steps on ice. We were paired up for a short speaking exercise. Just a few minutes. Simple questions. Where are you from? How long have you lived in the U.S.? What do you do for work? These are the kinds of questions immigrants answer so many times they stop feeling personal. Still, something felt different. He listened. Not the polite waiting for your turn kind of listening. The kind where someone actually hears you. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't try to impress me. No big vocabulary. No jokes. Just honest, simple sentences. He paused when he needed to. He didn't apologize for his accent. He didn't rush. That calmness did something subtle to my nervous system. I didn't feel the usual pressure to perform. I didn't feel like I had to be good at English. I just felt present. After class, we walked out at the same time. The hallway was quiet. People left in small groups or alone. No one lingered. That American efficiency again. He held the door open. I said thank you. He smiled and said, "You're welcome." Clear. Slow. Normal. Then we went in opposite directions. And that was it. No conversation in the parking lot. No exchange of phone numbers. No internal monologue about, what does this mean? I went home thinking about dinner, not destiny. If anything, I thought the class felt easier that day. Less heavy. And I didn't fully understand why. Over the following weeks, the same routine continued. Sit down. Open notebook. Practice English. Occasionally, we were paired again. Sometimes not. Our conversations stayed within the boundaries of the exercises. Short answers. Simple sentences. Everyday topics. Weather. Work. Weekend plans that sounded modest and realistic. What I didn't realize then was that routine was doing something powerful. Neuroscience tells us that repeated exposure in a low-pressure environment builds familiarity, and familiarity builds trust. Not romantic trust. Human trust. The kind that tells your body you're safe here. And safety is where connection begins, not attraction, not excitement, but connection. I noticed I wasn't as nervous speaking when he was my partner. I noticed I didn't rehearse sentences as much in my head. I noticed I laughed more easily, even at my own mistakes. That surprised me. Because nothing had changed on the surface. He didn't flirt. I didn't try to be charming. There was no story yet. Just shared space and shared effort. In American culture, people often expect relationships to move quickly or clearly. Dating apps. Clear signals. Defined stages. This wasn't that. This was something slower. Something almost invisible while it was happening. Two people showing up to the same place at the same time, for the same reason, week after week. And here's the part that matters if you're learning English or rebuilding your life. Connection doesn't always come from confidence. Sometimes it comes from consistency. From being seen repeatedly in your imperfect state. From not disappearing when things feel awkward or boring. I didn't fall in love with him in that classroom. Not even close. What happened was quieter. I stopped feeling alone during those 2 hours. And when you've been carrying loneliness for a long time, relief can feel almost like affection. If you had asked me then whether love could hide in routine, I would have laughed. Routine was the thing I blamed for my boredom, my numbness, my stuck feeling. I thought love required something extraordinary. A moment. A risk. A leap. What I didn't know yet was this. Routine doesn't kill love. Sometimes, it introduces you to it slowly, without warning, without fireworks, without asking for permission. Because the man who would later change my entire life first appeared as nothing more than the person sitting in the chair next to mine. And that's how quietly everything began. Simple English, big change. Nothing big happened at first. That's the part people rarely believe. When they hear a love story, they expect a moment you can point to and say, that's when everything changed. But real change, at least for me, didn't announce itself. It slipped in quietly, hidden inside very simple English sentences. The kind you almost don't remember later because they felt too small to matter. Our conversations stayed inside the classroom rules. The teacher would give us an exercise and we would turn to each other. Ask your partner about their weekend. Describe your daily routine. Share one small challenge. These were not deep questions. They were designed to be safe, predictable, easy to answer. And maybe that's why they worked. I said things like, I worked on Saturday. I cooked at home. I was tired. He said things like, I fixed my car. I visited my parents. I watched a movie. Simple English. Short sentences. No poetry. No drama. But something strange started happening in my body. I stopped bracing myself before speaking. My shoulders relaxed. My breathing slowed down. When you've been learning a language for a long time, you don't realize how much tension you carry until it disappears. Most of us speak with a hidden fear. Fear of sounding stupid. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being judged. But when English becomes simple enough, the fear loosens its grip. You stop performing. You start communicating. One day, during a speaking exercise, I couldn't remember a word. Normally, I would freeze or apologize. That day I didn't. I paused. I laughed a little. And I said, I don't know the word, but it's like, when you feel tired in your head. He nodded immediately. Oh, he said, like mentally tired. I smiled. Yes. That moment lasted maybe 5 seconds. But inside me, something shifted. I realized I didn't need perfect English to be understood. I just needed willingness. And patience. And someone who was listening. He never corrected me in a way that felt sharp. If I said something wrong, he repeated it back naturally, slightly adjusted. Not like a teacher. Like a human. That mattered more than grammar. Research in language learning shows that low-stress correction improves confidence and long-term retention. I didn't know the science then. I just knew I felt safe. We started sharing small opinions. Not big beliefs. Just preferences. I like quiet weekends. I don't like cold weather. I miss home food. These sentences didn't sound important, but they carried something real. They revealed values. Temperament. The shape of a person's inner life. Slowly, I began to associate English not with pressure, but with comfort. Outside the classroom, nothing changed. We didn't text. We didn't meet for coffee. We didn't follow each other on social media. Everything stayed contained within those walls. And somehow, that made it stronger. There was no rush. No expectation. Just presence. I noticed that on days when he wasn't my speaking partner, the class felt slightly heavier. Not bad. Just heavier. Like carrying an extra bag you didn't realize had become light until it was gone. That surprised me. I asked myself why. He wasn't exciting. He wasn't charming in an obvious way. He didn't try to impress anyone. But he made the space feel easier. And ease, I learned, is rare. Psychologically, this makes sense. Humans bond through repeated low-stakes interactions. Not through intensity, but through consistency. The brain releases oxytocin not only during dramatic moments, but during calm, predictable ones. Especially when you feel understood. Especially when you don't have to pretend. One evening, the teacher asked us to practice expressing feelings using basic structures. I feel underscore 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 when underscore underscore underscore. Simple. Almost childish. I felt awkward saying it out loud. I feel nervous when I speak English, I said. My voice was quiet. He looked at me and said, I feel the same. No joke. No explanation. Just that. Something about hearing my feeling mirrored back to me created a strange warmth. Not excitement. Relief. The relief of not being alone in your insecurity. The relief of knowing someone else is walking the same invisible path. That night, driving home, I realized something important. My English hadn't suddenly improved. My vocabulary hadn't exploded. My accent hadn't disappeared. But my relationship with English had changed. It no longer felt like a wall between me and the world. It felt like a bridge. Narrow. Imperfect. But real. And that bridge wasn't built with advanced grammar or fancy expressions. It was built with sentences so simple they almost felt embarrassing. But those sentences carried honesty. And honesty travels farther than fluency. If you're learning English and feeling stuck, here's what I want you to hear. Progress doesn't always sound impressive. Sometimes it sounds like, I don't know the word, but sometimes it sounds slow. Sometimes it sounds wrong. And sometimes, that's exactly what opens the door. Looking back, I didn't fall in love through deep conversations or romantic confessions. I fell into connection through shared pauses, small laughs, and simple English sentences that made my life feel a little less heavy. Big changes don't always come with big words. Sometimes, they begin with the simplest sentence you finally allow yourself to say out loud. Routine that felt safe. At some point, the English class stopped feeling like an effort and started feeling like shelter. Not a dramatic realization. No moment where I sat back and thought, this is important. It happened quietly, the way habits do. One evening I noticed that I no longer checked the clock during class. Another evening I realized I was less tired on class days, even though nothing else in my schedule had changed. That's when I understood something subtle was happening. The routine had become safe. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, my body already knew the sequence. Finish work. Drive through familiar streets. Park in the same spot. Walk into the same building. Sit in the same chair. Open the same notebook. There was comfort in knowing what came next. When so much of life in the United States still felt unpredictable, jobs, policies, accents, expectations, this routine didn't ask me to adapt. It simply waited for me. In American culture, routine is often treated like the enemy of passion. People talk about breaking free, escaping the 9-to-5, chasing excitement. But when you're rebuilding yourself in a new country, excitement can feel like noise. What you crave instead is stability. A place where your nervous system can rest. A place where you don't have to explain who you are every time you walk in. The class gave me that. I didn't realize how much emotional energy I spent every day just being functional. Translating thoughts. Monitoring tone. Adjusting facial expressions. Deciding when to speak and when to stay quiet. By the time evening arrived, I usually had nothing left. But in that classroom, something was different. The expectations were low. The pace was slow. Silence wasn't punished. Mistakes weren't emergencies. And then there was him. The man beside me didn't change his behavior. He didn't suddenly become more interesting or expressive. He was the same calm, attentive, steady. That consistency mattered. Our interactions stayed simple. We talked because the exercise asked us to. We listened because that was the point. No pressure to impress. No pressure to reveal more than we were ready to share. Safety, I learned, is not about comfort alone. It's about predictability. Neuroscience shows that when the brain can predict what's coming next, it lowers its defense mechanisms. Your body relaxes. Your breathing deepens. Your thoughts slow down. That's exactly what happened to me in that routine. I noticed that I spoke more easily. I didn't rush my sentences. I allowed pauses. I didn't apologize every time I made a mistake. My English didn't suddenly become better, but my fear became smaller. And fear, more than grammar, is what keeps people silent. One evening, the teacher asked us to describe something that made us feel calm. People shared small things. Walking in the park. Drinking coffee in the morning. Listening to music. When it was my turn, I surprised myself. I said, "This class makes me feel calm." The words came out naturally. I hadn't planned them. I felt slightly embarrassed, but also honest. He nodded. Not dramatically. Just a small nod, like he understood exactly what I meant. Outside of class, life was still demanding. Work deadlines. Bills. Weather complaints. Immigration-related worries that sat quietly in the background of my mind. But twice a week for 2 hours, none of that mattered. The class didn't fix my problems. It gave me space to carry them without collapsing. This is something people rarely talk about when they discuss learning English in the U.S. Language learning isn't just cognitive. It's emotional. If you associate English only with stress, your brain resists it. But if you associate it with safety, even briefly, it opens up. You become curious instead of defensive. Present instead of anxious. The routine also changed how I saw him. Not as a romantic interest. Not yet. More like a familiar presence. Someone whose existence made the environment feel balanced. If he was late one day, the room felt slightly off. If he wasn't my partner for an exercise, I noticed. Not with disappointment, just awareness. That awareness grew quietly. No butterflies. No excitement. Just a sense of alignment. Two people moving through the same routine at the same pace. Showing up even when tired. Even when nothing special seemed to be happening. And maybe that's why it worked. There was no pressure to define anything. In American dating culture, things often come with labels quickly. Intentions are discussed early. Expectations are clarified. This was different. This was undefined. And because it was undefined, it could breathe. I started to understand something important about myself. I wasn't afraid of connection. I was afraid of instability. I didn't need grand gestures. I needed consistency. And consistency is built through routine. One night, after class, as we packed our bags, he said something simple. See you Thursday. Not maybe. Not sometime. Just Thursday. Specific. Predictable. I smiled and said, yeah, see you. It was nothing. And it was everything. That drive home felt lighter. Not because something new had begun, but because something solid had formed. A rhythm. A small certainty in a life that still felt uncertain in many ways. If you're listening to this and feeling bored with your routine, I want you to consider something different. Routine isn't always a cage. Sometimes it's a container. It holds you steady while you grow into a version of yourself you don't recognize yet. I used to think routine was what made me feel stuck. What I didn't realize was that it was also what made me feel safe enough to stay. And sometimes, staying without drama, without urgency, without knowing why, is exactly how love quietly finds its way in. Is this even love? There was no moment when I suddenly thought, oh, I'm in love. If anything, what I felt was confusion. A quiet, persistent question that followed me home after class and sat beside me during dinner. Is this even love? Or is it just comfort? Habit? The relief of not feeling alone for 2 hours a week? In movies, love announces itself loudly. Your heart races. Your thoughts spiral. Your friends notice before you do. But this didn't feel like that. This felt calm. Too calm. And calm can be suspicious when you've been taught that love is supposed to feel overwhelming. I started paying attention to my own reactions. Not to him, but to myself. On class days, I chose my clothes a little more carefully, not in a dramatic way, just enough to look awake. I arrived on time, not rushing in at the last minute. When the teacher paired us together, I felt a small internal exhale. Not excitement. Relief. Like sitting down after standing all day. That scared me more than butterflies ever could. Because relief doesn't fit the romantic stories we grow up with. Relief sounds practical, mature, almost boring. And I worried that maybe I was projecting something onto him that wasn't real. Maybe I was just responding to routine, to safety, to the simple fact that someone listened to me without judgment. So I tried to be logical. I made a mental list. We hadn't talked outside of class. We didn't know much about each other's past. We hadn't shared dreams or fears. There were no compliments, no flirting, no clear signals. By every standard I knew, this shouldn't qualify as love or even the beginning of it. And yet, I noticed I remembered small details about him without trying. The way he held his pen. The pause he took before answering questions. The fact that he always said thank you to the teacher at the end of class. These were not romantic details. They were human ones. And somehow, they stayed with me. One evening, the teacher asked us to practice giving opinions using simple structures. I think, I feel, in my opinion. Basic English. We were discussing daily routines. Someone said routines were boring. Someone else said routines were necessary. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I said, I think routine can be good. It makes me feel stable. I felt exposed saying that, like I was admitting something fragile. He looked at me and nodded. Yeah, he said. Me too. 2 words. That was all. But those 2 words landed softly and stayed. That's when I realized the question wasn't, is this love? The real question was, why does it matter so much to label it? Psychology tells us that the brain craves clarity. Labels help us feel in control. When something doesn't fit into a clear category, it creates discomfort. Especially in cultures that value efficiency and definition, like the United States. Dating here often comes with timelines. What are we? Where is this going? How do you feel? But this didn't live in that world. This lived in the in-between. And the in-between, while uncomfortable, is where growth often happens. I thought about my life before. How often I had rushed to define things. To make sense of feelings quickly so I wouldn't feel lost. But this time, something held me back. Not fear, trust. Trust in the routine. Trust in the pace. Trust that not everything needs to be decided immediately. Our English conversations stayed simple, but they became warmer. We laughed more easily. Sometimes at mistakes. Sometimes at nothing. Silence between us didn't feel awkward anymore. It felt shared. Like a pause in music that makes the next note more meaningful. Outside the classroom, my life remained full. Work deadlines. Family calls. News headlines. But something had shifted internally. I was less restless. Less impatient with myself. Learning English no longer felt like a task I had to push through. It felt like a space I wanted to enter. That confused me too. I had always believed that love should add intensity to your life. Make things louder, faster, brighter. What I was experiencing did the opposite. It softened the edges. It made things quieter. And in that quiet, I could hear myself more clearly. One night, lying in bed, I asked myself honestly, if nothing ever changes, would this still matter to me? And the answer surprised me. Yes, it would. Because what I was feeling wasn't a desire for more. It was appreciation for what already existed. That realization didn't bring clarity, it brought peace. Neuroscience suggests that when we feel safe and connected, the brain releases chemicals associated with bonding, not excitement. Oxytocin, not adrenaline. That's why this didn't feel dramatic. It felt grounding. And maybe that's why it felt unfamiliar. Many of us mistake intensity for depth because we've been taught that calm equals boring. But calm can also mean aligned. I stopped trying to name what was happening. I stopped comparing it to past experiences or imagined futures. I let the routine continue. The class. The conversations. The shared presence. I let it be undefined. And something beautiful happened when I did that. The question, is this even love? Slowly faded away. Not because I found an answer, but because I no longer needed one. Because sometimes, love doesn't begin with certainty or passion or fireworks. Sometimes, it begins when you stop demanding proof and simply notice that your life feels better with someone quietly in it. Life pressures in the U.S. Living in the United States teaches you one lesson very quickly. Life keeps moving, whether you are ready or not. Bills arrive on time. Emails expect fast replies. Work schedules do not pause for confusion, loneliness, or quiet emotional shifts you don't yet understand. And as my connection with him grew, slowly, quietly, so did the pressure of everything else around us. Outside the English classroom, reality was loud. My job demanded constant focus. Meetings, deadlines, polite smiles, and the unspoken rule that you should always look capable. In America, independence is respected, but struggling silently is almost expected. You show up, you do your work, and you keep personal matters personal. There is little space to say, "I'm not okay today," especially when English is not your first language. Some evenings, I came home exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. Translating yourself all day takes energy. Translating your emotions takes even more. I would replay conversations in my head, wondering if I sounded confident enough, clear enough, American enough. By the time night arrived, my thoughts felt heavy. He had his own pressures too. Work responsibilities, family expectations, financial planning. We never listed these things out loud, but you could sense them in the pauses. In the way he sometimes stared at nothing before answering a question. In the way his jokes became shorter on difficult days. And still, twice a week, we showed up to class. That consistency mattered more than I realized at the time. In a country where everything feels temporary, jobs change, people move, plans shift, the routine of that class became an anchor. Not a solution. Not an escape. Just a place where life slowed down enough to breathe. One day, the teacher asked us to practice talking about stress. Simple English again. I feel stressed when, I feel better when. These sentences were basic, almost childish. But the topic was not. When it was my turn, I said, I feel stressed when I think too much about the future. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. He looked at me, then spoke softly. I feel stressed when I feel behind. Behind what? He didn't say. He didn't have to. Those sentences didn't fix anything. They didn't reduce our workloads or solve our problems. But they did something else. They made our pressures visible to each other and to ourselves. In the United States, there is a strong belief in self-improvement. You should always be upgrading your skills, your income, your lifestyle. While this mindset can be motivating, it can also be exhausting. There's an invisible race happening, and you're never sure who you're competing against. As our relationship quietly existed within this environment, I started to notice something. Pressure has a way of revealing what matters. On weeks when work felt overwhelming, I didn't want grand gestures or deep conversations. I wanted normalcy. Familiar faces. A predictable hour where no one expected perfection. That's what our connection offered. Not intensity, but stability. We didn't talk about the future. Not because we were avoiding it, but because the present already felt full enough. And honestly, that went against everything I thought relationships were supposed to be. I believed love needed momentum, direction, clear progress. But this felt different. It felt like two people standing still together while the world rushed past. Of course, doubt returned often. On stressful days, I wondered if this quiet connection could survive real pressure. What happens when routines break? When schedules change? When life demands more than calm conversations and shared silences? America doesn't make those questions optional. It forces them on you. There were moments when we both pulled back slightly, not from each other, but from everything. Less talking. More tired smiles. Life does that. And instead of pushing for reassurance, we allowed space. That was new for me. In the past, distance triggered anxiety. This time, it created trust. Because even in the distance, the routine remained. We still sat in the same seats. Still exchanged small looks of recognition. Still listened when the other spoke, even if the words were simple. Especially because the words were simple. When life becomes complicated, simplicity is not weakness. It's relief. One evening, after a particularly long workday, I almost skipped class. I told myself it wouldn't matter. But something pulled me there anyway. When I arrived, he was already seated. He looked tired. I must have looked the same. We smiled barely. Then the class began. Halfway through, the teacher joked about how adult life is the hardest test. The room laughed. I didn't. He leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "This test has no answer key." I smiled then. A real one. That moment didn't change our circumstances. But it reminded me why this connection mattered. Not because it was dramatic. Not because it promised certainty. But because it offered steadiness in a culture that constantly pushes for more. Pressure doesn't always break relationships. Sometimes, it strips them down to their core. And what remained between us was simple, quiet, and strong enough to stay. Because when life in the United States feels overwhelming, love doesn't always show up as passion or promise. Sometimes, it shows up as the one place where you don't have to run. When routine turns into choice. At some point, routine stops being invisible. You don't notice it at first. Routine is sneaky like that. It hides inside calendars, habits, and small decisions you make without thinking. It feels neutral. Harmless. But one day, usually when you're tired enough, routine taps you on the shoulder and asks a real question. Are you choosing this, or just drifting inside it? That question arrived quietly for me in the United States. By then, our English class no longer felt new. The room smelled the same. The chairs still made that soft scraping sound against the floor. The teacher told familiar jokes. Even our conversations followed a rhythm. A little talk before class. Focus during lessons. A few minutes after, then goodbye. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside me, something had. I realized that I was no longer attending class just to improve my English. I wasn't even going just to see him. I was going because that hour felt like a decision I was making for myself. In a life full of obligations, work schedules, social expectations, adult responsibilities, this routine felt chosen. That distinction matters. In psychology, there's a concept called autonomy. It's the feeling that you are acting by choice, not force. Studies show that when people feel autonomous, even repetitive tasks become meaningful. When they don't, even exciting opportunities feel draining. Somewhere along the way, our shared routine became autonomous. We didn't talk about it. We didn't label it. But we both showed up, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. And that changed everything. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, when I noticed this shift clearly. The teacher assigned us a partner exercise, but we weren't paired together. Across the room, I watched him struggle to explain a thought, searching for words. He paused, laughed at himself, and tried again. No frustration. No embarrassment. Just patience. I felt proud. Not romantically. Humanly. That surprised me. In the past, I measured connections by intensity, by how fast emotions grew, by how dramatic the story sounded when retold. But this felt different. This felt earned. Like something built slowly, without shortcuts. Living in the US teaches you efficiency. Faster routes. Better systems. Optimized lives. But emotional growth doesn't follow American productivity rules. It doesn't care about timelines or milestones. It grows when it's allowed to repeat itself without pressure. Routine did that for us. Still, doubt didn't disappear. Doubt rarely does. One evening, walking home alone, I asked myself a hard question. If nothing changes, is this enough? Not just with him, but with my life here. With my work. With the version of myself I was becoming. That question can feel scary. Because it removes drama and replaces it with responsibility. If nothing changes, you can't blame circumstances anymore. You have to decide. The next class, something subtle happened. During a discussion about daily habits, I said, routine can feel boring, but it can also feel safe. He nodded immediately. Then added, safety helps you grow without fear. That sentence stayed with me. In many cultures, including parts of American culture, love is portrayed as something that should constantly surprise you. Big gestures. Big emotions. Big risks. And while there's beauty in that, it can also make quiet love feel invisible. But safety doesn't mean stagnation. Safety means you're not wasting energy protecting yourself. It means you can put that energy into learning, into listening, into becoming more yourself. That's what routine gave us. Space to grow side by side, without urgency. One weekend, we ran into each other outside of class for the first time by accident. A grocery store. Fluorescent lights. Nothing romantic about it. We laughed at how ordinary it was. We talked longer than usual. Not about feelings. About work. About weather. About how strange American bread tastes. And then, without planning it, we walked out together. That's when it hit me. Routine hadn't trapped us. It had prepared us. It had tested consistency. It had revealed patience. It had filtered out illusion. What remained wasn't excitement, it was intention. I chose to be there. He chose to be there. Not once, but over and over again. In a world obsessed with next steps, that kind of choice is powerful. If you're learning English, or building a life, or wondering whether something quiet is worth keeping, this part matters. Progress doesn't always feel like movement. Sometimes, it feels like staying and realizing you're doing it on purpose. Routine isn't where love hides. Routine is where love asks if you're brave enough to choose it anyway. The moment we stopped pretending it was just class. There is a quiet shift that happens before any big truth arrives. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock loudly. It slips in when you're distracted, when you're focused on survival, routine, or simply getting through another week. That shift happened to me long before I had the courage to name it. By the time section 10 of my life began, nothing dramatic had occurred. No confession. No argument. No sudden realization under a romantic sky. Just a growing awareness that what we were doing together no longer fit the label we were giving it. This was no longer just an English class. It started with small changes. We lingered a little longer after lessons ended. Not because we had something important to say, but because leaving felt unnecessary. Silence between us stopped feeling awkward. It felt shared, comfortable, like sitting in the same room without needing to fill the air. In American culture, efficiency is everything. Conversations have a purpose. Meetings have an agenda. Time is money. So when two people choose to stay without a reason, that choice stands out. I noticed it one evening when I checked the time and realized we had been standing outside the classroom for nearly 20 minutes, talking about nothing useful. No goals. No plans. Just observations about the day. About people. About how strange it feels to belong somewhere slowly. That's when it hit me. I was no longer protecting myself. For a long time, I told myself I was being practical. Focus on work. Improve my English. Build stability in the US. Relationships could wait. Love could wait. That logic felt responsible. Adult. Safe. But safety can quietly turn into avoidance. In psychology, avoidance doesn't always look like fear. Sometimes it looks like discipline. Like productivity. Like telling yourself, this isn't the right time. I had mastered that version of avoidance. Until routine softened me. Routine lowered my defenses without asking permission. It showed me who he was on ordinary days. Tired days. Boring days. And I realized I trusted him, not because he promised anything, but because he remained the same. Trust grows in repetition. One class, the teacher asked us to practice expressing disagreement politely. We were paired together this time. The exercise was simple. Disagree without creating distance. We laughed at how awkward it felt. Then we tried. I disagreed with him. Gently. He listened. Then he responded without dismissing me. That moment mattered more than any compliment. Because love isn't proven when things are easy. It's revealed in how someone handles difference, pressure, discomfort. And right there, in a simple language exercise, I saw a future behavior pattern, not a fantasy. After class, we walked together again. The air was cooler. Fall had started creeping in. I remember thinking how seasons in the US feel symbolic, so clearly divided, so intentional. Change here doesn't apologize. We paused near my car. Neither of us moved. And then he said something small. Something honest. I like this. What we have. Even if we don't name it yet. There it was. Not a declaration. Not a promise. An acknowledgement. I felt relief more than excitement. Relief that I wasn't imagining things. Relief that I didn't have to keep pretending this was just routine, just coincidence, just convenience. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't care, but because I wanted to answer truthfully. When you've built your life carefully, you learn not to speak impulsively. Finally, I said, I like that it's growing without pressure. He smiled. A slow one. The kind that means understanding. That night, I drove home differently. Same roads. Same traffic. But my thoughts were lighter. Not because everything was clear, but because clarity had started replacing denial. Love doesn't always arrive as certainty. Sometimes it arrives as permission. Permission to feel. To hope. To stop minimizing something meaningful just because it doesn't look dramatic. In movies, love is loud. In real life, especially adult life, it's often quiet, respectful, and patient. The United States teaches you independence early. You learn to rely on yourself. To manage alone. That's empowering. But it can also make you forget how to receive support without guilt. What we were building wasn't dependence. It was partnership. Two stable people choosing to align, not because they needed saving, but because life felt better shared. That distinction changed everything. From that moment on, we didn't rush. We didn't redefine ourselves overnight. We simply allowed honesty to exist. No more pretending it was accidental. No more hiding behind routine. Routine didn't disappear. It transformed. It became intentional connection instead of convenient proximity. And intention has weight. It requires presence. It demands care. If you're watching this while learning English, or rebuilding your life, or wondering whether something quiet in your world matters, listen closely. Growth doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes, the most important moment is when you stop lying to yourself about what already feels true. Because love isn't always found when you search for it. Sometimes, it shows up the moment you stop pretending you didn't notice. Choosing each other when life gets real. There's a moment in every relationship when reality quietly asks to be included. Not in a dramatic way. Not with an argument or a crisis. It shows up disguised as logistics, schedules, responsibilities. The unromantic questions that don't fit into movie scenes but decide real futures. That moment arrived for us after honesty replaced pretending. Once we stopped calling it just class, life began testing whether what we felt could survive outside that safe, predictable room. And the truth is, the United States doesn't make that test easy. Work came first for both of us. Long hours. Unclear boundaries. The kind of jobs that follow you home in your thoughts. Some days, our messages were shorter. Some weeks, we didn't see each other outside class at all. Not because we didn't want to, but because adult life demanded priority. This is where many connections quietly fade. Not from conflict, but from exhaustion. I remember one evening, sitting alone with my laptop open, trying to focus on work while my mind wandered. I wasn't missing him in a dramatic way. I wasn't sad. I just felt off. Like something important had been placed gently in my life, and now I was being asked whether I would protect it or let it slip. That's when I realized something uncomfortable. Love doesn't disappear because people stop caring. It disappears because people stop choosing. In American culture, choice is everything. Freedom. Independence. Options. You can always choose something else, another job, another city, another version of your life. That freedom is powerful, but it also means nothing stays by default. So we had to choose. Not with a speech. Not with promises. But with behavior. We started doing small things that didn't look impressive from the outside. Scheduling time instead of waiting for it. Being honest about energy levels. Saying, I can't today, without guilt. Saying, this matters to me, without pressure. One weekend, we finally sat down and really talked. No distractions. No rushing. Just two adults acknowledging reality. We talked about work stress. About immigration worries. About family expectations. About the fear of building something in a country that constantly changes the rules. We didn't solve these issues. We didn't need to. What mattered was that we listened without trying to fix each other. That conversation felt different from anything before it. Not romantic, but grounding. Like placing your feet firmly on the floor after a long period of floating. I realized then that this was no longer about feelings alone. It was about compatibility under pressure. Psychologists often say that emotional safety is created when people feel seen without being judged. That night, I felt seen, not as a romantic idea, but as a full person with limits, fears, and complexity. And I offered him the same. From that point on, our connection deepened, not through intensity, but through reliability. When plans changed, we adjusted instead of blaming. When stress rose, we communicated instead of withdrawing. When silence appeared, it didn't feel threatening. That's rare. Especially in adult relationships shaped by past disappointments. There were still doubts, of course. Doubt doesn't disappear just because something feels good. It asks smarter questions instead. Like, can this last? Are we strong enough for what's coming? Those questions didn't scare me anymore. Because we weren't rushing toward an imagined future. We were building trust in the present. One night after class, walking side by side, he said something that stayed with me. Life here is hard, he said. But it feels lighter when I don't carry it alone. I didn't answer right away. I let the word settle. Then I said, me too. That was it. No declaration. No labels. Just mutual recognition. In that moment, I understood something important for anyone watching this, especially if you're learning English, building a life abroad, or wondering whether love can exist inside routine. Love doesn't remove difficulty. It gives difficulty a place to rest. It doesn't mean life becomes easier. It means you stop facing it alone. We didn't need perfect timing. We didn't need dramatic certainty. We needed consistency, respect, and the courage to keep choosing each other when life stopped being theoretical. Because the most meaningful relationships aren't built when everything is calm. They're built when reality shows up and you decide not to run. And here's the truth most people don't tell you. Love isn't proven by how strongly you feel. It's proven by how you act when feelings are tired. Love was never hidden, it was growing quietly. People often ask where love begins. They expect a location, a moment, a clear sentence they can underline and say, that's it. That's when everything changed. But looking back now, living my life in the United States, I understand something gentler and more honest. Love didn't begin when we met. It began when we stayed. By the time our story reached this chapter, there was no mystery left to solve. No tension about, what are we? No fear of naming what had already proven itself through time. Life was still busy. Work was still demanding. The world didn't slow down for us. But inside that movement, something steady existed. We were no longer testing each other. We were building. Our days became quietly shared. Morning messages that didn't try to impress. Conversations about groceries, schedules, and weather. In American culture, these things are often overlooked, too ordinary to matter. But ordinary life is where relationships either grow roots or disappear. Ours grew roots. We learned how to disagree without disconnecting. How to support without controlling. How to give space without creating distance. These skills aren't taught in language classes, but somehow, learning English together trained us for them. Speaking slowly teaches patience. Listening carefully builds empathy. Searching for the right words forces honesty. Language shaped us. I noticed how different love felt in this stage. There was no anxiety about losing momentum. No need to prove anything. Just a quiet confidence that this connection could hold weight. One evening, after dinner at home, we sat on the couch in silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that feels full. I realized I wasn't wondering what would happen next. That was new. For years, my mind lived in the future, planning, worrying, preparing. But there, in that ordinary American living room, I felt present. That presence was the clearest sign of love I had ever known. Eventually, life asked bigger questions. Moving decisions. Long-term plans. Family conversations. These weren't romantic topics, but they were necessary. And instead of fear, I felt readiness. Not certainty, but trust. Trust that we could figure things out together. Marriage didn't arrive as a dramatic proposal. It arrived as a shared understanding. A mutual yes built from 100 small choices made over time. Saying yes to patience. Yes to communication. Yes to growing together, not apart. When we became husband and wife, nothing magical changed overnight. Life remained life. But commitment gave routine a new meaning. It wasn't just something we shared anymore, it was something we protected. Our mornings, our evenings, our conversations, even our silences. Looking back, I smile at the question in the title of this story. Is love hiding in routine? The answer is no. Love isn't hiding. It's practicing. It's showing up when no one is watching. It's staying consistent when excitement fades. It's choosing the same person again on days that don't feel special. If you're watching this while learning English, maybe feeling stuck in repetition, unsure if progress is happening, I want you to hear this clearly. Routine is not the enemy of growth. Routine is where growth proves itself. You don't learn a language in one breakthrough moment. You learn it by returning, by repeating, by failing gently and trying again. Love works the same way. I didn't find love by searching harder. I found it by staying present, by allowing something ordinary to become meaningful, by trusting that quiet does not mean empty. By understanding that stability is not boredom, it's safety. And safety is where real connection thrives. So if your life feels repetitive right now, if your days feel similar, if your efforts feel invisible, don't rush to escape it. You might be standing in the exact place where something important is growing. Slowly, silently, strongly. Because love doesn't shout when it arrives. It waits until you're calm enough to recognize it. That's the truth I learned, not just about relationships, but about life. And if this story helped you feel seen, or gave you hope while learning English, or building a life far from home, then it has already done its job. If you've stayed with me until this moment, then maybe this story touched something quiet inside you. Maybe you're not just learning English. Maybe you're learning patience. Maybe you're learning how to stay when life feels repetitive, when progress feels slow, when love feels ordinary instead of dramatic. That's the truth most people don't tell you. The most important changes in life don't arrive loudly. They grow quietly inside routine, inside effort, inside moments that seem too small to matter. I didn't meet my husband because I was searching for love. I met him because I kept showing up. To class. To life. To myself. And, maybe, love found me the same way English did. One simple sentence at a time. So if you're watching this while doubting yourself, feeling stuck, or wondering whether anything meaningful can grow from your daily routine, remember this. You're not behind. You're building. This channel exists for people like you. People who want to learn real English through real stories. People who believe that slow progress is still progress. People who are rebuilding confidence, language, and life, step by step. If this story gave you comfort, clarity, or motivation, subscribe to the channel. New videos are coming, real English stories, slow listening practice, and life lessons hidden inside everyday moments in the United States. Subscribe now so the next story can walk with you on your journey. Like and share this video if it spoke to you. And tell me in the comments, are you learning English or learning to trust the process? Because sometimes the routine you're tired of is the life you've been quietly building all along.